Good morning. Welcome to our webinar today on workplace safety inspections. We hope there's a lot of questions today. Feel free to utilize chat. We'll answer them as quickly as we can. Melissa, you'll let to get the ball rolling?
Absolutely. So good morning, everybody. Like Tim said, we'd like to welcome you to our webinar this morning, Workplace Safety Series. My name is Melissa Olheiser. I've been with OECS for about 5 years, and I'll let Tim introduce himself.
Yeah, I'm Tim Peterson. I'm the VP of Operations. I've been with OECS about 27 years. And the topic today is very, very beneficial, and I'll bring a lot of my years of experience into this from facilities that I've been to. So with that, we'll get rolling.
Excellent. Well, today's agenda, we will cover, what is an inspection, the differences between inspection and audit. Tim and I will share some benefits. We'll go through maybe what to look for an audit, the safety pyramid, and our proven process. So to get this started, really, we want to start with just explaining the definition of what an inspection is. Looking at checking a list of items that are going to be verifiable. They're maybe sometimes narrow in scope. Maybe they're going to be completed for maybe an insurance company or a regulatory agency is in doing and completing an inspection. They may be using a detailed checklist to verify specific items or issues, concerns within that facility. And then when we go to looking at the definition of an audit, a little bit different, referring to more an entire management system. Many times the objective is to examine how are they managing risk? How is the company doing? Maybe may or may not be detailed, depending on what that facility or that on-site job site is using. But it also may be used beyond, where is the company benchmarking themselves? Are they using it to just check some check marks and check the boxes and keep going? Or are they actually using a process where they're using the audit to determine how to correct items and, have we done the proper amount of training? And so the definition from audit is a little bit different. Tim, do you have anything to add before I keep going?
The only thing is that you can look at the audit internally as more of a gap analysis system, where you're looking at all the different factors that you see out in your facility or on the job site and determine is there an adequate program in place? Is there adequate training in place? Or is it just a physical hazard that's been noticed and never been corrected? So you can use that as a real tool to benefit and utilize the results of what you find on your auditing.
Excellent. Well, that's going to bring us to our very first poll. So Lily is going to start here in a second, but we want to know if your organization already conducts audits, either yes or no. And then Lily will share the results with us here in a few seconds. Excellent. So a very large majority of our attendees are conducting audits. So that's great to see. Let's go to the next slide. So with that, we kind of want to know, when you conduct those audits, for those of you that answered yes, are you conducting them monthly, quarterly, or annually? And then Lily will share the results again in a few seconds. All right, so the majority of audits are being conducted quarterly, coming in at about 50%, and then next monthly at 38% and annually at 13%. Now, this is good information for us to talk about and share. A company is ultimately going to determine what's best for their facility or their job site, how often. It comes down to what is the benefit of it, conducting the audit, is like Tim mentioned, is there a gap analysis that's conducted that we figured out where are we not missing the mark? Tim, do you want to talk a little bit about the benefits of audits?
Yeah, we've listed 4 major ones there, and a lot of people are conducting audits because their insurance company requires it, obviously, or they want to make sure they're prepared for an OSHA investigation. But really what we want to hopefully emphasize today is the additional recognizing not only physical hazards, but behavioral hazards that we can run into. The other thing is when we do these on a regular basis and we follow through with the process, it really is a boost in employee morale because they see that the company is really pushing towards that last bullet of improving that safety culture. So look at and analyze yourself. Why is this being done in your facility? Is it a requirement that you hate doing, or is this something that you really want to promote and push to that positive safety culture level?
Right. So we talk about it being positive and proactive. The audit in many cases is going to be the company's greatest leading indicator when they're going to evaluate and measure, what is the impact? Where's the company stand? And there's a lot of other leading indicators that we talk about when it comes through with doing the audit. Tim already talked about behavioral based observations. These can be observed during conducting your audit. How are people behaviorally responding to the equipment they work around? What are their workplace actions? And can also look at how does the company correct them? Do we just indicate them on the audit and then just place that audit in a nice filing cabinet and we'll get to it later, or maybe it's not even ever come back to it, just sits there. But we can use this as a way to move the dial to where are the deficiencies? Where does the company want to improve? Instead of waiting for it to be a lagging indicator that, okay, now we have to respond. Something happened, we've had an incident, and we don't have a choice. We've got to go in and do some investigation. We can also see where maybe it could be used for a gap in training. Have we trained appropriately? Are we missing topics that are pertinent, that our employees are not understanding? Maybe it's just a knowledge for everybody throughout the whole facility, but the audit itself can be a great tool.
One of the things that we've changed in this pyramid, and I'm sure everybody in the safety world has seen this many times, but you notice the second to the bottom is physical hazards. We want you to think about this audit process as a way not only to identify at-risk behavior, but look at your physical hazards, machine guarding, exits, housekeeping, all these different factors that come into play. Because if you utilize this audit correctly, not only can Melissa said, identify possibly training gaps or program gaps or procedural gaps, standard operating procedures, but you're really looking at that physical hazards that so many times we'll go into a facility and we'll point physical hazards out and they'll say, geez, how did you find that? We've been here for 5 years or 10 years and we've never seen that. And it just jumped out at you. So really look and break this down and utilize this pyramid as really what your goal is, because if we can control that at-risk behavior by additional more trainings, if we can control and eliminate those physical hazards, those other 4 up on top can probably be eliminated or reduced to a dramatic level.
I agree. And so many of our clients that we've worked with, and we're pretty proud of this at OECS, that we have a proven process. And this wheel that you're looking at is how we help clients determine that maybe where is their gap, where are things where they need improvement. And so when we looked at bridging what that proven process, what we already have, to, hey, how can we transfer this into making sense to implement an audit program? So we can assess, we can plan, when does the audit get conducted? How often? Who's going to be involved in it? So that's the very first step that you would take in assessing, the frequency. And sometimes this might change based on future audits. When you get into this a little bit, maybe who you determine who is going to be involved changes, where you've seen gaps that, maybe we should pull in maintenance on this audit process. They're the ones that are going to most likely end up having to maybe fix or abate some of the concerns. Then we move to developing. So what are the company's goals? And is what's happening in their, factory or on that job site matching the goals? Do we have inefficiencies, who's accountable for overseeing that these are being kept up. And then we move down to implementing. Here's where we can take and set expectations, right? So we've got the company's goals. We know who's accountable. Here's the expectations we have. So going forward, we shouldn't continually see the same concerns on the audit. And if we are from quarter to quarter or biannually or however the frequency of the audit, if it's continually showing up, now we have some way to go back and have that conversation. Is there a reason these items are not being corrected? What's blocking them from being corrected over time? Because they shouldn't be repetitive. We can also then move down to training. Use the audit. Where were we missing gaps in training? Is there a knowledge for certain topics that we just haven't covered as a company? Then the last part of the process is always having some support. When there's upper management support, the checks and balances from the goals and who's accountable to getting things corrected. If it's supported by the company, this also changes your safety culture because things are getting done. We're communicating back. Everyone is starting to learn and recognize risks, hazards in the facility. Who do we bring those to? And we've started to really move the dial of everyone is looking and moving toward a more safer workplace. Kim, you have anything else before we move to a next poll?
Yeah, let's go to the next poll and we can get into these different key parts in a little bit more detail.
Excellent. So our third poll is for those of you that are, conducting the audit, how successful is the follow-through portion? After it's been conducted, do you get everything corrected? Maybe some things are corrected, or really nothing happens at all. It's just a piece of paper. And again, we just file it in a nice filing cabinet. And after a few seconds, Lily will share the results with us. Perfect. The results are in with a majority coming in at some things are corrected. Secondly, everything is corrected, and then just very few, nothing happens after the audit. And this is amazing to see that so many companies are being proactive, that we are making change. And we all know that doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it has to be put on a time schedule, especially if there's parts or pieces, things that we need to order to correct things that might delay getting things corrected in the time that we are expecting. But it's great to see that everyone, a majority of everyone is taking it seriously and making some changes. So when you talk about looking at, okay, where do we even begin this process? What should we even be looking at? Some places might use a checklist, which is fine because it's going to guide you through your own facility. But when you look at what should we look at through the general facility, you're probably looking at, start at the top to the bottom. We're looking at lighting, we're looking at flooring, walking, working surfaces, railings, mezzanines. What's the housekeeping like? And we go into emergency systems, eye wash stations, fire extinguishers, the emergency lighting, exits, assembly areas, different electrical panels, which then can move into, what kind of chemical hazards? Are we storing things properly? Do we have flammable cabinets? Do we have labeled properly? Compressed gases, are they stored the way they need to? And then we look at PPE. Are people using it? Are they storing it properly? Or is this going to be a concern? Is it accessible for them? Because we know many times if it's not accessible for the employee, they're just not going to take the time mostly to go look for it. So the more accessible we can make it, if they know who to go to replace it, it's going to make their system a lot easier. Look at machine guarding hazards second. So, where are we at in the process? Have we done an observation? Are the machines guarded? Or do we occasionally find ones where the guards have been removed and it's just back to work? You haven't taken that time to put the guards back on, or are they missing? Material handling, are the things blocking the aisles? Are they communicating? What's the equipment in good condition? Is someone inspecting that daily? And then general employee safety. So again, we don't have to have a very formal checklist, but when you're looking at a good rule of thumb, so start at the top, go to the bottom and front to back with your facility. And at the same time, you can watch for those behavioral issues. How are people, how are they doing their job? What kind of actions do they make? Are they following good habits, or they have gotten down to they're watching someone else's poor habits. So this next section, Tim and I are going to just kind of walk through some photos from audits that we've done over the years, and hopefully just help people understand, yep, we've identified this, or we have not even thought about that as a hazard. So Tim, do you want to kick us off with the start of this photo?
Yeah, over the 27-year period of my safety world with OECS, there's a lot of things we see. And one of the things I can stress to you, and Melissa talked briefly, is if a checklist is helpful for you, fabulous. Create a checklist to hit the majority, but don't take the blinders off to the point where you can't see everything, so to speak. And in this picture here that we see is really a behavioral issue. It's a training issue. It's a follow through as far as standard operating procedures, but it also creates a very serious hazard. As you can see, if there was an emergency, it's going to be very difficult to get out that emergency exit. Not only that, but it restricts the access to that stairway. So you're putting this down as a hazard of a blocked exit way, but also evaluate that and look at it and go, why was it put there? Did we have limited space that we had to put it there? Or was somebody not trained? Or what was it? What was the key element so that we can kind of go to that root cause, eliminate it so it doesn't occur again? And exits are one of the big things. If Melissa goes to that next slide, we also see the fact that in this picture, forklift with a tote of some type, again, driver's not there, but again, how do we get to that exit? So you could walk through as your audit and go, yeah, he's going to move that in a few minutes and we don't mention it. Well, next month, next week, next day, he now sets that down and now it really is a permanent blocking. So don't look at things and say, yeah, that'll get moved quickly, we won't talk about it. Look at it as really what is the benefit of this audit that you're conducting, and that is to change, correct, but most identify the hazard that is taking place in the facility on the physical side as well as that behavioral side. Melissa, is this something that you see often once in a while? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it actually is something that I believe most associates see. And like Tim said, just because it's maybe this glimpse of time, right? You're doing this audit, you're conducting, and you're thinking, well, it's just going to be this moment in time, and I know later it's going to be moved. But if this moment in time is occurring multiple times during the day, then we have a concern. That's more about how are we training. Another thing to point out is if your emergency responders are trying to get into the facility and this is the exit they need to use to come into, it is now obstructed for them to get in if they're responding to an emergency within your facility.
Covers a lot of different areas, yes. The other slide that we're going to move to is one that really gets missed a lot, and that is ratings on a racking system. How much weight do we put on that? And is that racking secured? But most important, can I put 1,000 pounds on that rack? Can I put 2,000 pounds on the rack? I've investigated some very, very serious accidents over the years. One fatality because a racking system was overloaded and it ended up taking a person's life. So how does that operator or that employee know how much weight to put on it? Well, it needs to be labeled. OSHA's looking at it. Is it 500 pounds per rack? Whatever it is it placarded and is it noticeable? And do we train our material handlers to make sure they understand that overloading that rack is very, very, very dangerous? Openings on the floor. This is the drain in the facility that we visited a while back, and they didn't think it was a big deal because we had to get the water and the stuff off the floor in that area. But if you can see, if somebody were to step in that open area on the far end of that, it could create an ankle injury. It could create a serious fall, depending on what they fell into. So kind of look past what the purpose of that device is and ask yourself, does that device create a hazard to my employees? And if it does, what can I do to identify, but also come up with a corrective action? And this is where these audits can be very, very useful to be involved in a safety committee concept. So if we're not quite sure how to, we can bring a group of people together and discuss and come up with different options. That's the other valuable to this audit process, is it gets your employees involved in corrective actions.
And I'd just like to add too, so beyond this, look at where you have floor transitions. Many times those are going to be a trip hazard. How do we identify those to prevent slips, trips, and falls? So it's looking at the whole working surface. Take a good look at the flooring throughout your facility.
This is one that when I was at this facility several years ago, it wasn't even considered a hazard. And then when we started looking at it more involved and on the other side of it, there was no protection on the other side. So if an employee were to open this overhead door, they're exposed immediately to about a 15-foot fall. And so when we put the red lines in there that said, hey, we need to have some type of guarding so that if that door does get open and an employee isn't paying attention, again, a behavioral thing possibly, that guarding issue is corrected and it takes away that hazard. Or what other options, what is the purpose of this door? What can we do? So now you look at the process. Why is it there? Who has access to it? How is it controlled? Is it locked? Is it secured by a lock and key and only certain people have access? Or what do we do? Because right now it really falls under the walking working surface standard of OSHA, which again reduces that potential for falls and slips and trips. In this case, could be a very serious fall. Well, listen, I'm going to let you talk about fire extinguishers because this seems to be a hot spot for you. And I don't know, I see a fire extinguisher, so I'm not sure what the problem is.
Right, it's just there. It's ready for when we need it. But I think most associates that are within that we work with see this on a regular basis. It's just, we have to remember that the accessibility around the fire extinguishers, we have to be able to get to it when we need to, and we shouldn't have to move product to get to the fire extinguisher. We see it quite often, actually. If it becomes an issue or a concern, this is again a great topic to take to a safety committee. Can we move or relocate this fire extinguisher? Because now we need to designate this location as possibly storage. If we do, where's the nearest one? Can we move it in a close radius to this, but still have it available? It's again just a great topic and something to bring to the safety committee.
Bradley, I'm really impressed with your observation. I agree that super soaker to the left of the wall there is a perfect fire extinguisher, but the problem is it doesn't have a large quantity of water, but good checks on that part. So again, the cool thing of these observations that you just came up with in the chat is, hey, things like that can increase horseplay and all that, you bet. So you already taken the blinders off and you're looking past the initial hazard, which is the access to the fire extinguisher. And you know, hey, why do we have a super soaker here? Is this something that we play around with, or is that their means of cooling off? It creates all that discussion. So congratulations for those comments. The other thing, if you've ever watched the video on how quickly a fire spreads from the time that it's ignited to now it's engulfed the room, the value of getting to that extinguisher very, very quickly is crucial. And if I can't reach it and I have to move that box, which could be heavy or not, I don't know, how much more has advanced that fire to a level that all of a sudden we may not have a structure or may put people at risk. So timing is great, but congratulations on those observations. I was curious if somebody was going to bring up the super soaker.
Oh, Tim, isn't this look okay? We're good with all this.
Yeah, I don't know. When I looked at my electricians and I talked to them, I said, it's really great you make these things out of metal so I can use them as my bulletin board too. And they don't quite agree with me. You can't use them as a bulletin board. You can't use them as a tool holder. We pointed out two things in the circle, but I would guess that the majority of the people watching this video say, hey, Tim, you missed a lot of stuff. You know, the power cord hanging around there, accessibility is one big factor on that. But if in time of an emergency and I need to get to that panel to pop a breaker, how much longer is it going to take when I have to move the garbage can, the wash bucket? All those factors come into play. So really look at your power panels, is they have to have that clearance in front of them. And I want to stress, yes, they need to have that 3-foot clearance in front of them, but you got to be able to have access to get to the 3 foot. because I was in a facility that they had the 3-foot clearance in front of it, but you couldn't get to the 3-foot clearance because everything was blocked around it. They went, hey, all I had to do is have 3 foot. No, make sure that you can get to what you need to get to in a time of emergency, because what we can never plan on and predict is how we're going to react in that time of emergency. So clear access is very, very, very important. There's another power panel. Now, is there something besides not being able to gain access to it? What do you think, Melissa? Are we missing something else?
Sure, we can't leave them open like that, just have the doors open all day.
Yep.
So as you're doing your walkthrough, it's normally going to be on the behavioral side. We open this and we have to open the door in the morning. We use the panel to turn on lights, and we just leave it open. So it becomes more of a training, getting in the habit of closing the panel back after we've opened it up for whatever reason.
One of the other, go ahead, I'm sorry. One of the other things I noticed in panels, and we didn't get a clear picture because, but are those breakers labeled? If I turn off breaker 1, do I know what I'm turning off? And has that being checked? So often things get changed in facilities and they don't go back and relabel that panel, because again, if it says power panel L1 breakers 2 and 4 runs my grinder, and it's been rewired and it doesn't run my grinder, it could create a lot of problems. So double check your power panels, make sure that they're labeled. So every breaker, and if it doesn't control anything till it's a blank, write down on it, blank, not in use. Those are the things that are important. So again, the comment says the National Electrical Code does not require a door to cover breaker handles. It does not require that. Yes, there's a fine line between the National Code and what OSHA is looking at. OSHA is looking at also the environment of reducing the dust factor and accessibility to it. So there's always that little bit of a push differential from the NFPA to the NEC and OSHA and stuff. So if you have a little bit concerned on that part of it, look at it really as a best practice to keep those doors closed rather than having them left open as you see here. But thank you very much for your comments. I see them across there. And if we happen to miss one, Lily will jump in and let us know which ones we missed.
All right. So I'll turn a little bit from looking at the facility now to let's talk a little bit about hazard communication and employee right to know. So most of us know that we have to communicate what kind of contents are in tanks and bulk storage. But how do we do that? So these labels maybe came in, they've been permanently placed here, they don't get changed out, but the company is still responsible for communicating what's inside. So we can create a label that communicates this is whatever solution, and everybody in the facility then knows what's in it, what are the hazards. We break that down a little bit when we even go into transferring into a secondary container. So even if it's water, we need to communicate that the contents inside are in water, or what else is it? Here's what we often see is, so you take a photo in your facility and the person working in that area, they know what's inside. But when there's someone responding to an emergency, not everybody in the facility may know what Tim put in this container and what he's using it for. So it is really the truly part of hazard communication. Let's communicate back to everybody. What are in these containers? How do we protect ourselves? What are the hazards? And it comes, we can then, are we missing the mark on training? Does this come back to, have we not trained what the company's response, policy is? Or have we just allowed this to happen? Now it's a behavior. We've got to go back and do some corrective actions on that. Also, just want to talk a little bit about when we have containers. So this looks like it should be a distilled water, but distilled water, typically when I see it, isn't kind of like a orange or apple juice type of coloring. So what is this now inside? Many times these containers for water or your sodas are not, they're not created, they're not manufactured in a way to hold a chemical. So we really need to go back and find get a proper chemical storage container and use those rather than a food and beverage container. Because again, you don't have no idea if what you're putting inside can, the structure can even hold it up, or what really is in you don't pull off the label to relabel these. So you start getting down a rabbit hole of there's a lot more concerns with this.
Years back, I had a situation where an employee put acetone in a Mountain Dew bottle. And unfortunately, he forgot he put acetone in it until it hit his lips. So bad things can happen very, very quickly to an individual. But the other factor that you really want to look at is, again, is it being labeled and is it the right type of container? Some of the ones that get misused often are the squeeze bottles for ketchup and mustard, because they work great for applying different products. But that red squeeze bottle and that yellow squeeze bottle, it represents ketchup and mustard. So if you're using secondary containers, just remember to use the secondary container that's designed for the chemical you're putting in it. And then, as Melissa said, make sure it's labeled adequately to inform the employees of what the chemical is and the hazards. So, but yeah, this is one we see often, that people are using food and beverage containers. Coffee cans are another one that's used a lot to catch oils and solvents. Again, make sure that they're used correctly.
All right, Tim, you want to talk a little bit about respirators and PPE?
Yeah, when we're walking through the facility, and when we walk through a facility and do an audit, we always try to tell people we're looking for things that are OSHA compliant or non-compliant, we might say, but we're also looking for risk factors. So walking through this facility and I see these masks, there's a few things that are concerning to me. First of all, the container is open. You can see the plastic bag on top. So the masks that are inside are now being exposed to the environment. But the other factor that goes back to utilizing a gap analysis within this is it brings up a question. Oh, you are using respirators in your facility, because if you read the box, it said respirator. Do you have a respiratory program? Have you done any testing to verify what you need for respirators? Or maybe it's voluntary and you just need to have Appendix D. Has anybody been trained on the proper usage of respirators? So now it just opened up the door for a compliance issue of a compliance program. And so if you're having respirators in your facility, make sure they're stored, make sure they're sealed, not be exposed to chemicals and other environmental issues. But again, making sure you have the proper documentation for the employees that are wearing them, that they've been educated and that they can correctly wear them. Because if you look to the one to the right, that's a different type of respirator with that exhalation valve and the adjustable straps on it and stuff. So it brings you to a different level. And a lot of times when I'm walking through with people, they're saying, geez, I'm not really sure why we have them there. I guess if somebody wants to wear one there, they can wear one. Well, it really does change the whole scope of where your safety program and compliance level really should be also. Melissa, we put this one on because you voluntarily put your safety glasses in the picture, which I thought was really great. So I'm not sure what you did on the weekend, but obviously it might maybe mud wrestling or the mud truck or something, but your safety glasses obviously here saved your eyesight.
Yes, it is. And when we talk about selecting PPE, are we protecting from the hazard or are we creating another hazard? So when you're doing your gap analysis and you're observing, do we have the proper footwear selected for the hazards that the employees exposed to? Same with gloves. Do we have hearing protection? Have we done noise testing? So that's another, if you get into a facility and you're conducting your audit, but you can't hear the person talking, well, have we done any type of noise sampling to see what are the levels in here, what are the employees exposed to? So it's just a good way to kind of check and balance, make sure that what you've selected for PPE is still working, or do you have to go back and make some adjustments?
We'll go back to that PPE one more thing, because one of the things on this is it in good shape as Melissa was talking about, but I look at the shoes and the gloves are the huge issue there, because a lot of times, even though if you read the book on duct tape, it probably says it's an adequate shoe bending kit, but it really doesn't do the right job. Are we getting our employees the right protection? And do you have a policy that you give the employees X number of dollars for footwear or for eye prescriptions or whatever it may be. So kind of take that whole scope and look at PPE on a little bit more internal level for usage, but also for wear and tear and the different hazards they may go into. One part of the plant may be much more hazardous and rough on the shoe, for instance, versus other plants. So really use that as a tool to better your employees' safety as well as their usage of their equipment.
All right, so we talked about this photo a little bit. It's you can see some stairs, a couple of steps right behind the cylinders, but the one cylinder in front is not secured. So someone could very easily come down this staircase, they trip, maybe they put their hand on this. Now the compressed gas cylinder becomes a missile. It really, they do need to be secured, and probably in front of, blocking the staircase is not the greatest location. So this just becomes, again, a behavioral issue. Where is the best place? Well, this is where it's always been, Melissa. So this is just how we're going to work around it. We're going to adapt to the placement of either equipment or supplies. Well, sometimes that's not the answer. Tim, you want to talk about this nice lamp?
This is one of my favorites, the task lighting. As I always say, when I find these things, it says, give them to somebody you don't like. Well, no, that's just kind of a joke on that part. But you look at that electrical light, there's a lot of hazards there. The bulb isn't protected. The outside shell on that, if you've ever used one or had one, they're not real secure. It's not grounded. It's a 2-pin prong on it. And that attachment that's now attached to the ply or the stud wall is a very light rubber coating, and that gets cut and damaged quite easily. So if you were to attach it to a metal stud or a metal table and there was a short in it or whatever, it could create a real serious situation. So what I tell everybody is you need task lighting. Make sure you get approved task lighting that's grounded. And in today's world, get LED. Don't go to the halogen because they heat up if at all possible. But really look at that picture of what the intent of the task lighting is. Is it needed? Can we do something that's maybe more permanent? So now we're looking on the corrective action side. Or if it's something that needs to be temporary, like the lights, then let's make sure we have the adequate light and the safest light possible.
Right. And then one more thing to point out before you keep going is make sure that your light bulbs, you're in these fluorescent light bulbs, are they new bulbs? Are they old bulbs? They need to be secured. What if they tip over, they break? Now you've got concerns for that as well.
I can't believe anybody didn't jump in and say, hey, you forgot about the light bulb storage there with the fluorescence, but we'll forgive them for that.
All right. Tim, is this from your work, from your garage?
Well, I did take a picture of my garage last week to add to it, and I'll work on the housekeeping later.
All right.
Is housekeeping an issue? You bet it is. OSHA can cite for lack of housekeeping or poor housekeeping, however you want to classify it, under the general duty clause, because we are required to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards. Obviously, there's a lot of hazards here. We got a heater, we got chemicals, we have all kinds of stuff stored in there, let alone the limited access. And several years ago, there was a facility in another state, I won't pick on Minnesota because they were clean on this one, was cited for a room in their facility, and the citation read uninhabitable by human beings. And the room that was cited was the bathroom. So think about housekeeping. Not only is it positive because if it's done correctly, it increases work ability. You can find things. You're not mixing hazards that can create a combination of problems through a reactivity. And visually, it just makes life a lot better. Again, the morale of the whole facility. But this is something that unfortunately we see often, because there's usually, like in our home, we have a junk drawer. Well, at least I have a junk drawer, maybe. But in facilities, we usually have kind of a junk room that we kind of shove everything into once in a while. Take that time to look at it and say, what can we do to better reduce that potential risks? And is it stuff we should just dispose of, or we just need to reorganize it?
Right. All right. So the next few photos, I'm going to have Tim kind of overview just for the sake of time and staying, so we don't go over our time. But Tim's going to talk a little bit about, machine guarding, what to look for. So the next few photos are all going to be about machine guarding.
These are not only physical hazards, machine hazards that a person could get severely injured in, but in some cases they go back to a behavioral hazard. That person took off the guard to replace, in this case, a belt and never put the guard back on. I'll do it later. I got in a hurry. We got the machine running and whatever the excuse is. So when you look at machine guarding, always ask yourself, did I create a barrier to prevent the employee from getting through, over, around, or under to the point of operation? And obviously in this case, that's not the case, because he or she could not only put their hand into it, but if they lean just correctly, they might get their hair caught in it or a piece of clothing. And that machine, that bolt and pulley system isn't going to stop just because my finger got in there. It's going to keep on going and do some serious damage. The next machine guarding issue that Melissa's going to switch to is one, again, that a lot of people forget about. And this is on a bandsaw. And the concern here is, if you look at the two circles, where that piece of metal is placed on the bottom left is very, very thin. So we're probably cutting a piece of metal that's maybe a ½ inch thick. You look at the exposure to that blade, it's a lot more than a ½ inch. Get your people to reduce that exposure by closing that guard so that only the point that needs to be cut is being cut with the blade. Because once in a while, bandsaw blades twist. And if it twists right and snaps, it can create a serious hazard where that guard now is going to prevent that blade from flying out and injuring an employee. So whether it's a horizontal bandsaw or a vertical bandsaw, this is one that gets caught quite often in our inspections, but also in an OSHA inspection because it's right there in front of you. Point of operation. Again, go back to that guarding definition I took. Can I prevent that employee from putting his or her fingers into that point of operation? And you'll say, well, they had to do the job, and look at the sign that says keep fingers clear from pinch point. Well, signs are great, but if they were really successful, there's not a person in this webinar that would ever speed, ever run a stop sign, or ever do anything on the highway because the signs tell us not to. Well, we know that unfortunately signs aren't always followed. That's why machine guarding is so important. Look at the process and put together a system to prevent that person from coming in contact. And again, we can guard in a lot of different ways, and we can spend a lot of time on guarding. You can guard by distance, you can guard by restriction, by fixed guardings, by light curtains, a lot of different things, but leaving it totally unexposed allows that employee to inadvertently get in harm's way. And then this is one of my favorites. If you look at the top of this photo, right below the red line on top, you'll see two little holes. That's where the screws go to anchor the guard in place, but we don't have a guard. Somebody took the guard off for whatever reason, probably a really good reason, and never put it back on. Now we have exposed our employees to moving parts and to parts that could create an injury. So when you're looking at that, and you'll say, well, they'll get back to that later. They just wanted to make sure it was running good. That's not a good excuse. It's, again, a behavioral thing. It only takes a split second for an employee to inadvertently slip, fall, or move his hand or her hand into this point of operation. And now we have a lost finger or a damaged finger or worse. So look at machine guarding as one of those physical hazards and really look at it as, am I allowing that employee to create that access point, or if I created a way to prevent them from getting to that point of operation? And there's a lot of different ways to accomplish it. It just needs a little discussion once in a while.
All right, the next couple of pictures, just a couple of items that I think get overlooked, and we see them quite frequently, whether in a facility or on a job site, is what's the condition of the cord? Your power cord, your equipment cord, extension cord, whatever it is. And you can see on this one that the conduit's been pulled away from the plug end. But if there's holes or frays or cracks, maybe the ground pin is missing, these should all be removed from service, replaced. So take the time when you're conducting your audit to look at these things, because employees often are not going to take the time. But that again, it becomes, have we trained them? Do they know to inspect equipment prior to use? The next one with the cord. So this is, I feel, pretty behavioral. That piece of equipment could have very easily be plugged right directly into the wall. They didn't need to have an extension cord, but the flat ribbon cord is also not rated for industrial use. So depending on where this is, we look at getting an extension cord that is rated. And the second thing is, are we using that extension cord then as permanent wiring? Because we know that that is also something we can't do. We've got to make sure that it's plugged directly into a wall.
So one of the things with electrical, to remind you, which is very frustrating if you've ever gone through an OSHA investigation, is anything to do with electricity is considered a serious violation. And those serious violations not only go on your record and can create problems, but they cost you dollars. So even a ground pin. So really emphasize and look at these electrical issues and look at it as an equipment issue, or do I need to get some rewiring done, or is it a behavioral thing that Melissa talked about? Thanks, Melissa. Air hoses, pressure lines, and how they're attached to the devices, to the connection points. In this case here, a quick coupler. This little clamp that you see here is called a screw worm clamp or a water clamp by most hose clamps. And they can only be used on water lines, not on pressure lines like on an airline. And if you look close at this picture, there's two of them there. Probably because the first one wasn't doing the job correctly, because you don't know how tight to tighten it. But if you look at the very first one, or closest to the bottom, you can see it's actually cutting into that outside insulation of that airline. In other words, it could be doing damage to it. And that's one of the reasons. But pressure clamps need to be put on with a tool that puts the adequate amount of pressure on that clamp and takes care of it that way. So look at your airlines and look at what we got for clamping systems. It's amazing that once you notice these and you start walking through your facility, whether it's a construction site or a general industry site, it is huge. The question is, what is the name of the clamp again? Screw, S-C-R-E-W, clamp. It's or just a water clamp. If you go to a hose, to Menards or whatever, you go to the hose clamps, you'll see these in all sizes. But again, they can only be tightened down with a screwdriver as tight as you think you can get them, and that's one of the concerns. And if you tighten it too tight, as you see here, it cuts into that outside insulation. The other thing that happens a lot with electrical and different systems is they use electrical tape as a quick fix. And electrical tape is not to be used for that means whatsoever. If you can see here, the electrical tape is coming loose. As I always say, that when electrical tape gets warm, it comes loose. When it gets cold, it comes loose. And so it's not really in good condition whatsoever. Make sure the connection to your quick coupler or your outlet, as Melissa talked about, meets the standard of what we're trying to protect from. So electrical tape, duct tape should not be utilized in this format whatsoever. And again, in this case, it's considered a serious violation. So your employee comes to work in the morning, stops at the drive-up window to get his breakfast sandwich and said, hey, don't worry, I'll put the oil, chemical, and air mist on when I get to work. It's just always floating in my air. Look at what the hazard is here. We're on a workbench. We got a WD-40 right there. We got a can of oil there. Obviously, we got solvents, and he's more than likely, or she is going to be working at the same time. So whatever's on their hands is going on that sandwich, which is now going in their mouth. And so really look at how people are utilizing their work areas in combination with lunch areas, even on beverages. You know, you grab that coffee at Starbucks or wherever, and you say, hey, just send it to me black, and I'll add the oil and the solvents later when I get to work, because it's going to be floating in the air because I don't have a cover over that. Make sure, again, we're reducing that exposure. It's a twofold deal. It's behavioral, but it also is an environmental issue on stuff as far as what we are, what we're not allowing to happen within our industry. And this one I see a lot. I've seen people, you know, taking bites out of an apple and sitting it down on their workbench and then working with tools and grabbing the apple again and it can create some real serious problems. Going back to a story, actually had an employee swallow metal shavings because he was using a grinding stone and at the same time was eating his sandwich and lunch. And obviously the metal shavings grabbed onto his fingers and grabbed onto his sandwich, and he ingested metal shavings. About 3 o'clock in the morning, wasn't feeling really good. He started spitting up blood. Yeah, he had some real serious problems. So going back to the right to know or the hazard communication, make sure we have PPE and we got the proper protection when we're working around chemicals and definitely food.
All right. So a lot of employers do like to offer their employees, maybe there some medications or over-the-counter meds. But the thing with this is if everyone's sharing these containers, we all know that once you open the lid and you pour it into your hand, more than 2 that you're going to take fall out. So now whoever touches it in their hand is pouring it back in. We don't know if it's been contaminated. We don't even know if what's inside of these is actually the ibuprofen or the aspirin. So keeping those limited to a first aid kit where someone can go and it's controlled. They know they're going to take a packet, and in that packet there'll be 2. They'll take they can take them and dispose of the packaging, but it really is designed to be monitored. So we just shared the picture as a business best practice to keep these things in a first aid kit. And then lastly, when you're doing a walkthrough looking for equipment that has damage, as to how the housing on this has a crack. Another thing with fans is like home or office fans are not rated for industrial use. So depending on where this is and what it was being used for in the facility, it might not be one that can be used on a plant floor. But when it's broken, let's get rid of it. We're not going to wrap duct tape around this and try to fix it. Just again, why is it here leads into more conversation, which again, you get to learn more about what's going on with that employee and maybe in that work area.
The other thing with residential equipment stuff is in your break rooms. A $29 Mr. Coffee that you buy for your home should not be used in your industrial facility because they get left on for long periods of time and they overheat. And we probably have all seen pictures over the years where a Mr. Coffee has just basically melted and in some cases started a fire. So Lily, there was 2 questions that come up. Can you bring those up or repeat those to us? I missed them.
Yes, so David says we have our computers and printers plugged into surge protectors and the surge protector is plugged into the outlet. Is this considered an OSHA violation extension cord?
No, it's not. It's plugged in directly and it was designed for that. Always double check yourself. Is it a true surge protector or is it a multi-strip outlet? And that's just for the protection of the equipment. But in your situation for computers and printers, that's not an issue. If that surge protector was plugged into an extension cord, then plugged into it, then we may have a bigger problem, which I think somebody said something about daisy chaining. Was there another question?
Bradley said, as long as you're not daisy chaining them, it's all low voltage and should be fine. No heaters or refrigerators in a surge protector. They don't typically use large enough wire for high voltage.
Yep, daisy chain is the plugging 2 extension cords in, the 225 foot to make a 50, you shouldn't do that. OSHA gets very upset about that. So if you need a 50-foot cord, but again, on the other side of it, if you only need a 15-foot cord or a 20-foot cord, don't buy a 100-foot cord and have it wound up because again, it creates not only a trip hazard, but another housekeeping hazard. So there's a lot of different things. And some of the things that get missed is people bringing in their residential coffee makers, their hot plates and things. Make sure that in your break room, that equipment that people are utilizing is approved for industrial use. In other words, continuous use in some cases, a lot more than what we would do in a residential home. You make your pot of coffee, you drink it, an hour later, the coffee pot's turned off and it's done for the day, rather than having it turned on for 4, 5, 6 hours at a time. Those are the concerns you want to look for that part of it. But in this short period of time, hopefully we've given you some guidance on areas that you might have looked past. We can all see the real serious things It's some of the little things that create that serious problem when we allow them to be ignored. So I'm going to let Melissa kind of follow up on it, on the closures, and then answer any other questions.
Thank you. So going back to our proven process, but why we spent so much time, again, Tim and I just wanted to maybe give some, maybe some ideas of things that maybe people aren't looking through for on their audit, but then taking it to the next step of developing. So are we aligning the audit and using it to meet company goals? Have we, what does our the accountability look like? Do we need to make changes? An audit can be that moving document, right? You do one quarter. What's changed or improved? Where does the company need to adjust? It doesn't have to be that we've done it in stone and it's going to stay that way, but we can also use it we've talked many times about improving the knowledge. Some people just don't know where have we missed the gap with training. And so it is a very measurable document that can help us move the dial to the next phase, which is implementing. So we take it, and this is where the follow through is so important. Can we set expectations? Do we set dates? Okay, these things are going to be corrected by tomorrow, by the end of the week, by next week, and we have a time frame. Who is going to be completing them? What's the process of showing and proving back that we've got them abated and fixed? And then what's the next thing? Do we need to set up training then? Inform and communicate. The more that we're communicating, it doesn't seem like such a burden or a task, or one of those things where people just hate doing. We don't like audits. There's so much work. Well, when they're becoming part of a cycle, they don't have to be so much work because everybody's got buy-in, and you should hopefully be seeing less of them the more that audits you conduct, which then I like to go into the training aspect, because when we are correcting actions and we are making traction, now you communicate it back out. Everybody on the plant or that job site can now be also looking at corrective actions. How do they recognize hazards in their workplace? Are they going to this right person? Are they reporting? Okay, we're going to take this. I've got a question. I'm going to take it to maintenance or my supervisor. So we're starting to turn the dial, and we are improving our training, our knowledge, and recognizing risks. And our safety culture begins to become more proactive, and it's improving along the process. And the audit process is helping us really change our culture. So people are bought in. They know that we're going to communicate back the results. We're going to share things. Maybe it goes to a safety committee, and then those minutes are posted and employees can read from them. But is there a question in the chat?
David asks, can we use extension cords for floor fans during the summer months?
Sure, you can. Go ahead.
When would this be considered an OSHA violation, if at all?
The only time it would be an issue if it's creating a trip hazard, so you're running across the aisleway, or if there's damage to the cord. You can use extension cords in a lot of different ways. They're just not designed and approved for permanent usage. And permanent usage means they're anchored to something, they're nailed to, they're hooked, and you can tell that they're not getting moved. Or they're creating another serious hazard, which would be a trip hazard, or they're running through a water puddle, things such as that. Otherwise, yeah, there's no issue with it. Just make sure that it's a safe situation.
All right. And the last component on the process is support. So we have ongoing and never-ending management support, and that's going to be a huge key. So when the audits are not supported, that's why they don't get completed. That's why they sometimes fall off, and people don't like doing them because we're doing all these audits and nothing happens. We're going to complete these and we don't make any traction. It's just the same things reported time after time after time. So when there is support, again, you start to see buy-in. You get more people on board. It doesn't seem like such a burden. So we really truly hope that we were able to give you some insights and answer questions, or even give you a process to make your inspections or audits a tool and not something that people don't look forward to. So I think we've hit the mark on the bullet points that we wanted to cover today. So we do have one final poll. If you could please score the webinar. A 3 if it was great information and helpful. A 2 stars is it was good with a few takeaways, or it was poor, we missed the mark. And this is how we as a team make sure that we're delivering material and content in a manner that's useful, because you guys gave up an hour of your day to spend with us. and hopefully it was beneficial. These results do not get shared with everybody. So I just think I'll go past. All right, so again, if you need to contact us, Tim and I will stay on for a few minutes. I know it's 12 o'clock, but my contact information and Tim's contact information, either our email or our cell phone. But just another, please remember that our webinars are pre-approved if you need a CE, and the survey will go out afterwards to everybody. And if you need that CE component, there'll be directions on what you can do to follow that. But I do think there's some things in the chat. Should I answer the chat, or do you want me to talk about this next?
Just finish up on this and we'll chat later.
Perfect. So just a quick blurb about the next webinar, that it's going to be on OSHA's most top 10 most cited citations violations, and that will be Thursday, May 5th, starting at 11.
Lily, what are any chat questions that we can help with quickly before we finish up our deal?
No more questions. This just thanks for the great webinar from multiple people.
Excellent.
Please feel free to reach out to either one of us with any questions at all. We'll talk to you all you need to. We'll be more than glad to visit your facility if you need a third set of eyes or another set of eyes, however you want to look at that. We thank you very much for your time and have a great rest of the day.